Okay, my start recording is not working. Hold on one second. Sorry.
It looks like it's telling me that it's recording.
Okay. Okay, now it's recording. Thank you. So please forgive if you hear this conversation on the recording. Please forgive us right now. Good morning, Community College family. It is a pleasure to see you this morning. I do miss seeing you face to face, but until then, we guess this will have to do. Today, we invited you to this installment of the Strategic Enrollment Management Professional Development Series. As you know, we've had trainings over the past summer and this semester, and we will continue to do so. So today's session is going to be Psychology of a Comprehensive Enrollment Management Strategy, establishing your focus and enrollment goals. And I'm elated, and it is my honor to say that we have two phenomenal presenters this morning. We have Ms. Paula Dibley from Forsyth Tech Community College, and we have Ms. Emily Thomas from EdNC. They have agreed to graciously do this session for us. But before they begin, I do have a couple of housekeeping rules. If you would, one, mute yourself just in case someone comes into your office and you need to have a conversation. And also, if you're on a call, please mute your call. And if you're calling in, please, if you have a call come in, hang up or switch over. Please do not put us on hold because we will hear your wonderful elevator music, which we really don't want to hear this morning. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to my wonderful presenters. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hickman. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having Emily and I this morning. We are thrilled to be able to be here and to be talking with you. People can see the slide on the screen. Is that right? Johnny, I see your head nodding for me. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me that confirmation. Perfect. Okay, great. So I just want to take a quick moment to introduce who you have talking to you today, and then we'll dive into the presentation. My name is Paula Dibley. I have the privilege to work at Forsyth Technical Community College. I serve as our Vice President of Strategy and Outreach. But I've been in the community college system for the last decade, first at Rowan Cabarrus Community College and now at Forsyth Tech. And before that, my background was in the sort of I was agency side working in communications and marketing in DC before I moved to North Carolina. So kind of have a mix of background and experience, but again, the last decade or so has been in the trenches, working, doing this important work, and just thrilled to be able to talk with you today. I met Emily recently. Goodness, was it only just last month, Emily, that we met?
Yes, it was.
And we started just a passionate conversation about the work that we do and how important it is for us to work really hard to reach potential students and to keep them and help them be successful. And she and I just had a lot of good vibes, and she had some unique experiences. So anyway, let me introduce Emily and let her tell us a little bit about herself, because I think that she provides a really unique perspective that I think we can all learn from. Emily?
Thanks. So as Paula was saying, I am with EdNC. I am a policy analyst for EdNC. But prior to joining EdNC, I've been in and out of the community college space for about 12 years. So I've worked with 2 community colleges in Western North Carolina. Now I am an adjunct.
Hey. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Hey, can I ask anybody maybe just to make sure you guys mute?
That's odd.
Perfect. Thank you. Emily, please continue.
Great. All right. So I have been at 2 community colleges in Western North Carolina, Isothermal Community College and Caldwell Community College. But prior to joining EdNC, I actually was an enrollment strategist, and I helped several different colleges and universities create plans and strategies surrounding student recruitment. So we kind of talked everything, and we'll get into this, but we talked everything through the funnel about what type of communication and marketing needs to happen to recruit, but then also really sustain that engagement for students through the funnel level in enrollment management.
Perfect. Thank you. So you can see that Emily's got some unique background. I love that she's had experience working with private colleges and helped them shape their communications plans. And I think that we all have, we can learn a lot from the kind of work that I think that some of these private schools paid a whole lot of money to get Emily to do for them. So anyway, today's presentation, we have together about the next, well, not quite 90 minutes anymore, but either way, Dr. Hickman was generous to provide us with tons and tons of time to be able to talk with you this morning. I'm not quite sure he knew what he was getting himself into when he gave us that much time to speak with you. So Emily and I are going to do the best we can to make sure that today's conversation is not just another one of those virtual webinars where you're bored out of your mind and you are working on your email inbox. So we are hoping that it'll be interactive. We've got several different breakout sessions planned, as well as then time for sort of a Q&A. And I just hope you'll stay with us the most you can during this conversation today. Okay, does that sound good, guys? All right. I am going to go ahead and we're going to dive in. And I think that when Emily and I started preparing for this conversation, we wanted to first off just really recognize that things have been really, really hard. Let's take a pause to kind of recognize where we're at right now, that the environment that we're in has been really tough for the last year. And then the other thing I think I just want to recognize is that we're not perfect, right? You know, we don't have everything figured out, but hopefully the value in today's conversation is that we can take this time together away from maybe our emails and our text messages and our Teams chats to spend together kind of above the fray, talking about how we can strengthen our beloved colleges and then the incredible students that we serve. So, here, why are we having this conversation? Does this look familiar, folks? Have you seen this graphic one too many times over the last year? I'm personally tired of looking at it. But COVID has been such a factor for us over this year. So I don't think that we can have any conversation about strategic enrollment management without recognizing COVID and the impacts. So, you know, I just think that it's important to note that it has really impacted our students, and then it has fundamentally impacted our enrollment. At Forsyth Tech, we have not been immune to this. You know, we had a big summer last year. We were up and sort of surprised by that. But fall and spring were difficult, and spring was worse than fall for us. And I think that was that's been really, really hard. And Emily, I think you were also going to share that we haven't been alone in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things to sort of point out when we talk about the COVID year, and now we're kind of going into year 2 of COVID, is that really as late as June of 2020, we heard lots of things that, you know, if we look at historical trends when it comes to enrollment, that enrollment, right, should go up, because historically when there's a recession, that enrollment increases. But I think what's really important to remember here, and I just spoke to the president of Cleveland Community College, Jason Hurst, about this, and he says, you know, this recession is not your typical recession, and meaning that you had some job loss, but then you had others who really were experiencing a lot of gains. You had certain companies that were doing well. So you have this divide. And I think that because of some of that divide, and not only that, COVID really impacted people across the board, because you had, you know, parents staying at home with their students to help them virtually. You know, the whole issue that we talk about often is that, you know, broadband access, device access, accessibility was really problematic for so many students. And so what we saw was that in fall 2020, we had an 11% decrease in enrollment, and that's based on FTE. So we're talking about like FTE because that's what budget, of course, is based on. So, only 4 schools across the entire system either remained flat or increased in FTE for fall 2020, but everyone else decreased. And I think that trend, I don't think we have final numbers yet, but that trend is true for spring 2021 as well. And Paula, if you want to go ahead and
yeah, no, I think that it's a really a great point, and it's helpful to me to understand sort of that global picture for all of us. And I think that, so the thing is that in some ways we're facing the same reality, and we've all sort of dealt with COVID. However, I think it's really important for us to remember that we have not felt that pain in the same way. All our struggling communities who need us really much have felt that very differently. Our president at Forsyth Tech, Dr. Janet Spriggs, she has likened this situation we have dealt with to a storm, right? That COVID has been a storm. However, we're not all in the same ship, that our boats are different, that we have not all had yachts to kind of carry us through, the situations where folks have had their net worth increasing during this pandemic. We've had a lot of folks who are in the rowboats and are struggling even more so and not been able to weather the storm in the same way. For those of you who attended the virtual Dallas Herring lecture this year and heard Dr. Pam Ettinger speak, she talked about how our students are family strong and economically fragile. And I think that that's been a big theme that we have had to pay attention to as we're serving our community college students. So I think that, to me, this is giving us just that backdrop that it was hard to do the work that we're trying to do before COVID, right? It was not easy. We were still having these conversations. We were trying to figure out what to do and how to find students and get them here and help them be successful. That was hard work before. It's even harder now, but we have to do more. We've got to, our president likes to talk about chasing those students, right? We've got to, we're not going to chase the FTE, but we are going to chase those students because they need us. And that's our job. So, I don't think that we're 100% sure how to do all of that in a post-COVID environment, but we know that we certainly need to. Okay, so the other thing I think I just want to convey, though, is that COVID is one element of this backdrop, but there are other reasons and factors that make today's conversation really, really important.
Sorry, I will kind of talk about this. So when we talk about the cliff is coming, like Paula said, COVID is definitely not the only reason that we have issues with increasing our enrollments or even sustaining enrollments. Now, I know that in fall 2019, many individuals or many community colleges experienced increased enrollments, but that has been sort of this anomaly for what's been occurring the past 10 years. So one of the things that, if you look at national data that we talk about is that, the population in the United States is expected to decline. We've got a 15% decline that is expected across the board. So one of the things that we continue to think through is that if you don't have, the population to pull from, then what's the plan? So I think when we talk about this cliff, we talk about, the fertility rate or the birth rates are, of course, lower. You actually have people in certain areas, when we talk about North Carolina, that are moving out of certain locations, certain geographic places. And so that's, of course, going to decrease your availability, the population that you can pull from to enroll students into your colleges. So Paul, if you want to kind of talk about the next several things that why this is problematic and it's not just a COVID thing.
Absolutely. The other thing, I think the other factor in all of this is that I think that our work now more than ever, and this is sort of, I alluded to this earlier, there is, I believe, a moral imperative to do the work that we're trying to do here. It's education is this great potential leveler. And if we don't take these opportunities to really seize the moment to go after students in an aggressive way to help them reach those post-secondary credentials that we know that they need in order to have family sustaining wages. If we don't do that, I mean, who's going to do it, right? So I feel like I feel an aggressive call to do that important work. I have heartburn over this, and Mason Sawyer from Forsyth Tech, she knows all too well sort of some of my heartburn over this is that one of the reasons I think we need to pay close attention to our work in this area is that we've got a lot of folks who came to us, who came to one of the Great 58, and they started on their journey. But at some point they got derailed and they've left. So they're walking around and they're in this category of some college, no degree, right? In some ways, I worry that they are worse off than they were before they came to us. Some of them now have student loans that are on their backs that they didn't have before they came. So I think that it's just, it's very important for us to do what we're trying to do. All of that being said, I think that to me, this leads to what I'm considering our call to action, right? That we have to, as a system at our individual colleges, we have to do better. Our work is too important. Our students and their dreams are too important. And if we don't do it, who is going to do it? We're the organization in our communities who are going to combat generational poverty and create those better futures. You know, I mean, it's really just the key to creating more equality in a society full of inequalities. So Emily and I in today's presentation are going to challenge us to do better, to step up our game overall, to be more strategic and purposeful with how we are doing enrollment management.
I'd like to just kind of add, and if you read the recent enrollment article that EdNC just published, I think on Monday, that one of the things, and I know that all of you are familiar with these stories because you all work with students, but as an adjunct instructor, so I teach public speaking, and I give a speech assignment that students talk about their past, present, and future. And one of the things that students have to do is show some representation of what that is, like what's your past, present, future. And I had a student in my class hold up literally a blank piece of paper with a question mark and said, listen, because of COVID, I don't understand or don't even know what my future is. It feels blank. It feels there's a lot going on in my family. And I know education is important, but I'm not sure how to get to that point. So I think that's just a stark reminder for me that what we're doing in all of our spaces, no matter where we are, it's important because a better educated state helps boost the economy, but also it just gives students hope. And I think that's one thing that we need to remember as we continue to do the work. And this is hard, right? You guys are all doing things, wearing multiple hats, and it is a difficult thing to do. Go ahead, Paula. Sorry, I just want to interject that.
So having said all of that, lots of preamble there, Emily and I started talking about, like, you know, if you want to do this work, how do you do it? And do you still need the strategic enrollment management plan? Do you need something that, you know, is that archaic? Has it gone away? Do you not need that? What do you need?
Right. And so one of the things that, Paul and I we have this table debate sort of what does the plan look like? And I think that, the archaic kind of plan of, and we'll get into that a little bit later, of enrollment management may not work right now. And that's one of the things as community college leaders that we have to learn to be flexible and adapt to things. But it doesn't mean that you don't need a plan, because it's really important that you have some type of plan that you can rely on, but then also building in even the flexibility. And I know that sounds crazy to think like, how can you build in like this spontaneous flexibility? But I think it's really important that you have something, a starting point that you can deliver that really has this overview of what does enrollment management look like and what should a plan look like. And knowing that things can change, but it doesn't mean that you just need to get rid of everything because, well, it's been COVID, so everything's changed, so therefore you don't even need to plan about these things.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Emily. And I think that what I'm hearing from you, Emily, is that the answer is yeah. So do you need it? Yeah, it's just probably going to look different than it did 5 years ago, than it did 10 years ago. And I think that, to me, the crux of the matter really comes down to the fact that it's almost not even about the plan. Ultimately, it's about the act of planning. It's the process of aligning it with your strategic plan. It's not. It's more about not that we don't have enough resources to do what we need to do, but it's the way we think about using them and taking the time to kind of think through how we best use them. And I think it's probably that this plan today looks a lot closer to some of the agile strategic planning and that kind of work that you see coming out of some of the tech space, rather than things that are a little bit more set in stone, like Emily said. It's really going to be, it's going to have to, it's us being more proactive. It's just recognizing that our reactive approaches to enrollment are not going to be sustainable, and that we've got to be really inclusive with the whole college. So we're going to talk a little bit more in today's presentation, a little bit later, about the actual act of creating the plan and how you go through that. And if I could just ask one more time, I'm so sorry. If folks, if you're not speaking, if you don't mind having your muting yourself, that would be super helpful. We're just getting a little bit of background noise. Okay, wonderful, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk more about the plan a little bit later, but what I want to kind of, Emily and I, to sort of talk about at this moment is we're going to go through some key focus areas that I think that should provide the backdrop for the work that we do as we're thinking about diving into strategic enrollment management strategies, okay?
All right, so let's talk first about what we call getting the house in order. And one of those things is removing barriers for students. And barriers can look different for a lot of different people. And so one of the things that we have to always keep in mind is that, community colleges historically serve everyone. We serve lots of different students. And so recognizing that students come to us with different challenges. Some are at a higher level than others in terms of, maybe a GPA. Some have more resources, even just like there's food resources that are problematic for students. So there's lots of barriers. But I'm going to call out, I think she's in here. I think I saw her in here. Vanessa Tripp from Barton Community College. I had a great conversation with her last week about coming to the table with assumptions and why that's a problem. I think a lot of times we assume that our students know more than they maybe know about the college process. And I think that's a wonderful analogy to address whenever you think through what do my students understand and know. And a lot of times in the community college space, and I can tell you my colleagues at NC who have not worked for community colleges are often texting me saying, listen, there are like 1,000 acronyms that you guys use and I have no idea what's happening. So I think sometimes even in the enrollment piece of this is that we get comfortable with the language that we're using because that's what we've been using. So it's really even removing the barrier of language and jargon that we use to communicate this information and really getting it back to the basics. What do students need to know to get from point A to point B in the enrollment process? But it's not just about enrollment process, right? It's also about getting them all the way into the enrollment and then retaining them. So thinking through what are the assumptions, and sometimes it may even be you guys like creating focus groups to understand from your students, what is it that we aren't providing for you at the college or that you are struggling with to understand, even at the very basic points of that.
That's great, Emily. Thank you. Yeah, I think that it's helpful to talk about this and to think about removing barriers. And I think that it's also important to recognize that not all of those barriers are created equal in this situation, because I think, and I like to say sort of that I think that the devil is in the details, because you can have somebody tell you, oh, we're a Latinx friendly school, but you must dig into what does that actually mean. You know, what policies and processes have they put in place? Because I think that sometimes there are barriers, perhaps, that are designed to provide extra support, right? So maybe if there's a registration hold on students taking over a certain number of credit hours, because you want to make sure that they've had that clear conversation with an advisor about the workload associated with that. You know, that's different than a barrier of, oh, we added an extra step to the process, and we're requiring homeschool students to provide notarized copies of their birth certificate. You're like, what? No, that is not those barriers are not created equal. And it's important, I think, for us to be able to dig into them in this process. I want to take a moment to share an example from Forsyth Tech that I think is relevant. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach for all of this, but I think this is something that for us at Forsyth Tech has been impactful. And as a way, one of the things that we've had to do as we've looked at sort of what some of our barriers were for our students was to take a look at the way we had set up our efforts to support brand new, prospective, potential students, as well as our continuing students. And we looked at that from an advising and a recruitment lens. And we sort of took a slightly different approach to what we had in the past, which was largely a split model, but relied heavily on a faculty advising model and sort of a cattle call registration kind of setup, to an approach that is a case management model. And that really for us, what we set up was a set of advisors who were designed to support students regardless of where they were in the process. So this graphic is designed to hopefully illustrate that. What we did was essentially, we recognized that instead of thinking about students as prospects, applicants, enrolled students, that was hard for us to manage as we were thinking about supporting those students, because it seemed like we were turning them over pretty frequently at maybe key junctures. So if you had what our model previously was designed to we had recruiters who went into the high schools and went into the community, and not very many of them, and they tried to say, hey, potential students, come to Forsyth Tech and fill out the application. We want you to come. The second they filled out the application, though, they kind of transitioned to a whole nother team, right? Another part of the process. And it kind of just seemed like it didn't make a lot of sense, because we had these recruiters headed into the high schools, and they'd go in, they'd talk with Cindy, and they'd try to get her to come to Forsyth Tech. And but the second she did her application, we'd be like, okay, now head over to Forsyth Tech, go to the campus, and go, then you can do your application, and then you can meet with your advisor and do all those things there. And it was like, well, wait a second, why can't we have this same person who is there to help recruit at the high school? Why can't we have this same person meet that student where they are in their space and help them through that process? So what we did was we basically cross-trained all of these team members, elevated sort of like the skill sets, and said, like, listen, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a prospect, an applicant, it's about is meeting them where they are. So instead, we started looking at this as teams of people who were primarily off of the Forsyth Tech campus, which is what you see on at least my left, right? The recruitment and enrollment advisors, our career coaches, and our liaisons, and then the on-campus support team with our student success advisors. And the idea there for us was that we had these teams of people who could help support the students regardless of where they were. So then the other thing that would sometimes happen is that a student would come to campus they hadn't yet filled out the application, but they're like, hey, I think I want to come to Forsyth Tech. And we were like, okay, great. Have you done the application? They're like, well, no, I want to, I want to talk to someone about possibly coming here and how I do all of that. And they're like, oh, so you need to talk to the recruiter. So the recruiter is not here because the recruiter is out at the high school. I was like, so we wanted to make sure that it didn't matter where you showed up, whether you were in your high school or you walked on campus or you called us on the phone, that we were able to kind of meet you where you are. And that also meant for us aligning things like Career and College Promise. So we decided that we wanted the same advisor or the same coach in that school to help support students regardless of what they wanted to take at Forsyth Tech. So if we had a student who was interested in the electrical lineman program, which is a short-term continuing education program for us, if they were interested in that, if they were interested in taking Career and College Promise classes while they were still in high school, or if they were interested in coming to Forsyth Tech for, an associate degree program after graduation, that same person became the point of contact for that school and for the students, so that the student can have that same advisor as they move through their time period in the high school. And that way they build that relationship with the counselor, with the team, the staff, and the students at the school. I know that was really long-winded, Emily. I hope you'll forgive me for my sort of tangent here. But I just thought it was useful maybe to provide an example of what we were thinking of when we're talking about kind of trying to get some things in order for you to set the foundation for the work that you're going to try to do. Having said all of that and been super long-winded, and you guys have listened to Emily and I talk at you for more than half an hour here, what we'd really like to do is we'd really like to step into breakout groups and talk a little bit about removing barriers and what improvements you've made on your campus to support enrollment management, to make things more seamless for students. Would love to take some time to chat with you guys and hear what great ideas you have and things you've been implementing on your campuses. And I hope you'll all turn your cameras on during that time and we'll get to actually have a little dialogue. So
I'm going to go ahead and set up the rooms. How long would you like to be in there?
So we'd like 10 minutes at this point, if that's a possibility.
That is fine. So once the rooms get started, I will set it for 10 minutes.
Wonderful, thank you.
See if I can work this technology.
We are so grateful for technology, right? Because what would we have done in this last year without it? But also at the same time, when it doesn't cooperate, we're always like, ah!
It is now assigning participants, so it should put you all in rooms momentarily.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And if I see you and Emily in the same room, I'll try to move one of you to the next room. All right. Emily, are you in the room? Elizabeth, New, are you in the room with people? You on mute. Did they put you in the room?
I'm unsure. I see some like initials down at the bottom, so I feel like there's people in here with me.
Okay, I want to make sure. It looks like
I see a KBRHJC. I'm assuming that's people's initials.
Joanne, are you in the room?
Yes, I am. I just put my camera on. I'm here.
Okay.
And I see
I'll make
Elizabeth.
sure you're all in rooms. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, how are you guys? So is this the other breakout room or
I'm unsure. I'm hearing multiple people talking, so
oh,
Okay. I'm seeing 8 people in the meeting when I look at participant list, if that's helpful to you.
yeah, it's just really strange because I think we had like maybe 180 folks here
Yeah.
overall, and there's like a bunch of them are over in that one room, and then I got stuck over there. So
I can hear Monty right now. I don't know why.
You can hear me?
I can't. No, maybe it's not you. I can hear somebody else. I thought it was you.
Let me work this out. I'm gonna see if I can work this out.
I'm hearing multiple people.
okay, guys, well, I'm not exactly sure what is going on, but guess what? We are going to have a conversation nonetheless. So if you've got access to a camera, please turn it on. I would love to just take a few minutes for us to chat a little bit about some of the things that you guys have done on your campuses that you're proud of or you feel like have tried to make it easier for students. So Joanne, I see you and you're nodding. Do you mind sharing something about
Sure.
what's happening at Cape Fear?
Sure, be glad to do that. Again, we're like everybody else has kind of been struggling and trying to come up with some creative things. One of the things that I think was fairly successful for us is we're really trying to leverage the COVID funds that we've received from the federal government. Now, we've gotten a very large share because we are such a large school. We have gotten millions of, literally millions of dollars to distribute to students. And so we had a first round of CARES funding and we distributed that and then did more with that and actually put some of our institutional share towards that. So we're trying to be very strategic in meeting student needs, but also using that money as best we could. So for example, one of the things that we did using the institution, and we had to be very careful because as everybody knows, there's lots of rules and regulations that go with this funding. But one of the things that we did in the spring is we used some institutional dollars to offer what we called a tuition reimbursement for any student who had received a WE grade, which meant that for spring, that they were a withdrawal for an emergency. We kind of enticed them to come back in the spring to say that we would use institutional funds and we would give you a waiver for the amount of credits that you withdrew from in the spring to take a course in the fall. It didn't have to be the same course, but if you withdrew from 3 credit hours during that spring of 2020, if you came back in the fall, we would credit you with 3 credit hours worth of funds off of your tuition bill, an equivalent to what you had withdrawn from. And that actually resulted in, for the fall term, we were one of the few schools that were actually very slightly up. I think it was a 0.02%. But I think a lot of that had to do because we were able to give that incentive to students. Now, again, it meant being very creative, and we're trying to do the same thing with this newest round of funding that came through here. But rather than just get rid of all that funds and do it all at once during spring, we're trying to very strategically figure what we can do within the regulations that the DOE has given us, where we can leverage some of that money to kind of help students, not just immediate needs now, but maybe help them think about coming back and making it a little bit easier going forward. So be curious if others have done strategies like that. So for us, that seemed to be successful, and we're trying to debate right now actually similar uses for this HERF 2 and HERF 3 funding that we've just received.
That's great. Joanne, so tell me, just so I understand, essentially they got, if they took a course, then they got that same amount back as like a credit or a refund?
Just a credit. We didn't give any refund back, but if they withdrew from 3 credit hours in the spring with it had to be the WE grade, which was really used to tie back to COVID. But then if they came back in the fall, and they registered for 6 credit hours, we gave them a credit for 3 credit hours against that 6 credit hour bill, because they used the tuition reimbursement that they had gotten from the spring. So some students, if they withdrew from 12 credit hours, they literally could come back in the fall, take 12 additional credit hours, and we would waive 12 hours worth of tuition for them. So it depended on how much they withdrew from. We allowed them that sort of a credit towards their fall balance. And
that's
again,
great.
That works.
Joanne, if you have like a link to a website where you guys put this or something, or even anything, if you could stick that in the chat, that would be wonderful. I would love to see, and I think that could be helpful to some of our team members. That's a great strategy.
Sure, I will look see if I can dig that out, and I'll get that in the chat in just a minute.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanne.
Sure.
Robin, I see you here on the screen. Or I did for a second there. Do you want to share maybe some things that have been that you guys have been doing to maybe remove barriers or make things more seamless for students?
I think we did something similar at COA as long as it was a WE that we had done, we gave some type of credit for semesters in the future for them to come back and take that class, or to try to keep them engaged and moving forward. So that was a similar strategy. I don't know that it would, I think we may have done it for the same class if they wanted to come back and take it, but we did do something similar to leverage those funds. I'm here especially because I want to hear strategies about health science students and how they're being advised across the spectrum from high school up, and those strategies that that help them move forward. So that's my main interest today.
That's great, Robin. And we'll think about ways we can also weave that into the conversation as we move forward. I've got some ideas too. Other folks, in our last couple minutes in our breakout, anybody else want to share some things that they've been trying to do to make things more seamless for students? Don't everybody jump at once. Daniel, are you there?
Are you talking to me? I'm here. I'm at the system office, so I don't really have anything to add.
You don't have anything to add? No great practices
learning.
You've seen?
No, and I can't get the camera to work for some reason. I'm surprised it let me talk.
Oh, we can see you.
You can see me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why are you sorry? Yeah.
I thought my camera was off.
No, we can see you. So, Robin, I think to your question, sort of, your hope to have more dialogue about health sciences students, I think that a couple of the things that I have seen get going or started, just in case it's of any interest. Do you know if College of the Albemarle has any sort of like pre-health career and college promise pathways?
We do. We have all of them that we can possibly get. And I think what my interest is so we have all kinds of pathways on and pathways off to degrees and certificates and diplomas. We have lots of stackable credentials.
Yeah.
But the thing that I'm finding is in the advising model, it really calls for a lot of expertise. If you try to get everybody to be able to advise health science students from all these different choices that they have, from high school on all the way up through, our associate degree programs, it's really complex. And then there's all these specialty admission processes and so forth. So I was really hoping to hear some things about best practices for that particular group on how you manage that highly detailed advising work for all these different programs, because we have our admission process so that it is stacked. So if a student doesn't get in this program, they might get in another program that they might get, so that makes it really complex. And we've had some issues and concerns, and especially with COVID and trying to do it at a distance, hooking them up to make sure they're getting the right information and getting in the right programs for them. So that's kind of where my interest lies.
I'm going to go ahead and close the rooms, and I'm going to work on it for the next room because apparently it's not doing what it said it'll let me do. So
no worries. Thank you.
And next time you want to break out, we'll have it working better. Okay.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you so much, Monty.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Robin, are you still there?
I think the rooms are closing.
Okay, great.
It takes a while.
How we can get that information back out to them.
All right, hey, Paula, I think we're back.
We are back, and next time we'll make sure the rooms are better. So if anyone knows how to work this better, please let me know. Thank you. We're back in one room.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. Okay. Can folks see my screen again? Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Callie. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and keep moving through our conversation. I hope that your conversations were good. I know some of you were in a really large room and the rest of us were in a very nice, intimate conversation. So that was kind of nice, but I hope that there was some good dialogue there and that we'll maybe be able to build on those conversations as we move forward in today's meetings. So let's keep going. We talked a little bit already about getting the house in order. So let's move on. I think that the next area of focus that Emily and I would just like to cover is the need for us to kind of, frankly, step up our game. And I think that the two keys here that I think that it's important for us to pay attention to are both communications as well as our use of technology, and in a lot of ways, the intersection of those two. So let's kind of dive into some additional conversation about this. I think that one thing that always strikes me that is a key difference between us and our four-year partners is that we are constantly recruiting students, right? I mean, I think that from the moment we're talking to them in advance of them considering doing their application, all the way through the application, the advising, the enrollment process, the financial aid process, getting them first day of class, through census. Even beyond that, we're constantly recruiting our students. And I think that is a greater burden that we face than our four-year partners as well. So it's something for us to kind of keep in mind and understand that. I've said this before, but I really think that we've got to think about a little bit more carefully about how we're using our technology. And one thing that at Forsyth Tech, we've made a really concerted effort to focus on in the last year and a half is investment in technology that we think is going to help us better communicate and better support students. So a couple of those examples, we are implementing our first CRM at Forsyth Tech right now, and we're really, really happy about that experience because it's just something that I think that we've felt like we desperately needed. And we are also bringing on something through our financial aid team that I think is going to be super impactful. Some of you may already have Campus Logic, which is basically a portal for students that provides a lot of students self-serve, but also really clear information about where students are in that financial aid process. You know, have they been flagged for verification? Do they need to complete paperwork? And if they do, it's then easily accessible to them, and it's kind of all in one. Nobody needs to kind of come to campus and sign something or go print something out and fill it out. It's a much more seamless, user-friendly process. So I think that that's something I think that we need to pay attention to. The other thing that I think is important for us to think about is kind of the increased need for communication. You know, I don't know about you guys, but it always has felt to me like we need to communicate more. And honestly, COVID has taught me that more than ever, we need to communicate. And I think that the scary thing is that the idea that what used to feel like a good effort, I think it's just not anymore. It's not cutting it. You know, I think when it used to be like, oh, well, like the student didn't come to class, so like I emailed them, and then the student still didn't come to class, so I called, you know, and then I, you know, sent another email to their school email. You know, that used to feel like maybe a pretty good effort, but it doesn't work anymore. I was recently with some of the folks at Blackboard, and they had done a study recently, and this really shocked me. They talked about basically how one phone call, you know, say you've got a list of students who haven't yet paid for their classes, and you think, oh, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to call all these students. We're going to call them. We're going to say, hey, you owe us blah, blah, blah. If you don't, you're going to have to lose your schedule. Please pay your bill, or please figure out your financial aid, whatever. One phone call is not enough. But then the shocking thing to me was that if you've got a list and you make 3 phone call attempts to that same list, the study said that you'll reach 80% of your contacts just by having made 3 phone call attempts. And that was really shocking to me. That was like a wow, that's actually something actionable that we can do. You know, instead of just thinking that 1 phone call or 2 phone calls was enough, let's do the 3 and recognize that we're going to capture the vast majority of our students when we're trying to reach them. And I think that same metric applies to almost any group of students that you're trying to reach. You know, try 3 phone calls, not all 3 in a row, right? But like try 3 phone call attempts and see if that helps make an impact in the differences there.
All right, so the next thing that I want to talk to you about is this idea of the communication plan. And it is a lot to kind of digest. And so I'm going to hit the highlights. But as always, if you have any questions about this, you can always, our contact information is will be at the end of this presentation. But one of the things I want to talk about is that before you even start talking about a communication plan, and let me back up and say a communication plan in this environment, we're talking about the recruiting stage. So this is, you know, prospect all the way through until they are enrolled. You need to be communicating with them, like Paula said. It's that frequent communication. Now, there's additional communication plan after they're already in the class. But for this purpose, I'm going to talk about what's happening prior to them being in the class. But before you start, I think the one thing, and someone mentioned in the breakout that they are doing this now, they're actually going through a communication audit. I think an audit is a really great way to figure out what you have been communicating up until this point. And so you want to find out, what have you been saying to students when you talk about the recruitment stage? Where are the gaps? And if you lay all this out, And so I told you guys that previously that I was an enrollment strategist, and I would have stacks of papers sometimes from schools that would have, here's all the communication that we are, giving these potential students. And what we found out a lot of times was that you would have a lot of information at one stage in the funnel, and I'll talk to you about the funnel in a second, and maybe not enough communication later. Now, what's really important to know is that when we talk about communicating to students, is that the university partners, like Paul is talking about, they have a very strategic plan. They are doing this in seasons when they talk about what are the highlights. So we talk about FAFSA season, all of these things. This is all happening sort of in tandem with their recruiting communication plan. All right, so one thing I suggest for a lot of you to do is to play secret shopper. And one thing to do is go through as if you were a prospective student and figure out what things are missing, but also have other people on your campus, even your friends and family, to also do the same thing. And what you will find by this is that often information is not either A, easily accessible, B, it's not intuitive, or C, there's just something missing, or maybe there's something that's outdated. So it's really important to think through, whoever's in charge of updating your website, that this information is checked frequently because things change so often. So again, playing that secret shopper, but having others on campus do that too, because again, if you're in this element all the time, you may not realize where the gaps are. All right, so the next slide, Paula. All right, so we talked about this already, about removing those assumptions. That's why I said Vanessa's name, because she talked about this when we were on her phone call. And to limit the jargon that we're using. And sometimes we don't even know that it's jargon, but I can guarantee you that if it's a student coming in for maybe the first time and they have zero college experience, that everything that you're saying to them is probably jargon in some sense. And so it's really going back to the basics to figure out what is it that students need to know and how can I communicate that in a clear and concise manner. All right, next.
And Emily, while we're transitioning to the next slide, I have a couple of questions in the comment section. And so this question is not only for our presenters, but also anyone on the webinar who would like to answer the question within the chat. So if you can have an answer for them in the chat, just put it in there. The first one is, how are you measuring your impact with the phone calls? And I think the clarification is that I'm asking, was there any software or manually reporting the impact of phone calls? How did you learn 3 calls was what worked? And then there was another one, any recommendations of consulting or of a consultant or group to guide you through the communications audit? So if you, even not the presenters, but those on the webinar have a response for that, just put it in the chat. Thank you.
I think that's great. Thank you, Dr. Hickman. Yeah, and I was trying to kind of respond in there too, but I do hope that we can kind of use the chat as a place for comments, questions, and these threads about what's working for people, different recommendations. And I think that just to answer Hyro's question about the Blackboard had done a study. So basically they analyzed sort of when they made call campaigns, at what point did they find that they were reaching people. And I think that it made sense to me to think about this 3 call number, because I don't know about you guys, but if I get a call from an unknown number, I'm like, I give it the side eye. I'm like, well, they'll leave a voicemail. Maybe if they leave a voicemail and I'm like, oh, actually, that was somebody I did want to talk to. Okay, maybe the next time that they call, I'll try to pick up. Or, oh, but I was in a meeting the second time they called. Maybe by the 3rd time they've called, I've put their number in my phone. I have said, oh, this is Forsyth Tech calling me. Okay, I actually do want to talk to them because they got my application and they're ready for me to talk to me about blah, blah, blah. So I think that it made sense to me to think about the 3 calls as being the metric by the point. That's when they reached, like they had contacted and connected with 80%. And I think that there's other ways to kind of increase that, like sending text messages in advance of a phone call, saying like, I'm going to be calling you from such and such number. And even emails too, emails to like their personal email address to let them know that you're going to be reaching out. Those kinds of things I think can help increase the pickup rate in those kinds of situations. But yes, we'll keep talking about that kind of stuff, okay?
And I do want to mention, someone actually, I was looking at the chat, this is a good idea. Someone said that they let one of the business administration classes, is that it, course conduct a secret shopper. I think that's fantastic. Use your resources. You don't have to necessarily pay for outside consulting for these types of things. You can certainly gain insight from them, but then you can conduct it in-house as well. All right, so the next thing we talk about is who are you trying to reach? Understanding your landscape. One of the things that I suggest to community colleges to segment your audiences. You are very different than your university partners because you have so many different types of audience. You know, we have CCP students, CT, basic skills, transfer, and then we even get into stop out. So those who are no longer attending but have attended at some point. There are lots of different audience segments, but the reason that you want to segment those audiences is because all of those audiences really require different messaging. You're not going to say the same thing to a CCP student as to someone who potentially is, you know, basic skills or even the CTE. Not saying that some of the things don't apply, but just where they are in their life, their journey, all of these things are going to be a bit different. So I think it's very important that you sort of understand, and there's more, you know, that these aren't all, but these are just some of the highlights of the audience segments. The next thing with that, and again, this is a lot of information to digest, so I'm just hitting the highlights, but the next thing that you really need to start thinking about is developing this type of, this plan for a year of communication, right? So if you are planning for a year, then you are thinking through from a calendar basis of what is happening in the year that I think students in these audience segments need to be aware of. Some of those are general messages. So again, you know, applying for FAFSA, completing RDS process, all of these things are general, but then you start digging down into a little bit different layer to figure out what are some other things that need to happen. Well, what are the events that are happening? You know, when it's National Day of College, like Decision Day, right? So what messages are coming out then? Are you sending out messages during particular holidays or events? All of that needs to be part of your strategic communication plan, even at the recruiting stage. And the reason for that is, again, students are getting tons of information from tons of different areas of institutions. Having worked for a company where we helped colleges recruit students, there's a lot of money being funneled in, and there's a lot of things happening. So know that the competition is stiff in a lot of ways, but you guys, community college, which I love, there's so much that you have to offer. Affordability, you have such incredible and different programs, and so you really can make your mark and stand out, but it's really about being strategic in that. So the next thing with that is creating 3 to 5 overarching message that you know that you want your student and your audience segments to receive. And then you devise what we talked about, a year plan, and that can include lots of different communication mediums. That can be email, digital advertising, social media. I won't get into this, but there are 3 different types of social media: paid, earned, and owned, and figuring out at each level what needs to happen then. And then you have print. You know, Sandy Lackner in our breakout session said that isothermal used lots of mailers and postcards. You even have the option of handwritten letters. You have phone calls and text, and then of course in person. Nothing beats in person. So getting students to your campus, hopefully when everything is safe, to really experience what is it like being a student at Forsyth Tech, isothermal, those types of things. All right. So the next thing, you know, I talked about the enrollment funnel, and it really is important to think through what am I communicating at each stage in this funnel, from prospect to someone who says, you know, there's no interest here, to they've moved from a prospect to an inquiry. They said, I'm interested maybe, but I don't really know yet. What information needs to be there? And then they apply, right? Now, what I will say is at the community college level, you kind of miss a lot of times this inquiry level. Most students go from I'm a prospect straight to the application, because that's sort of how we set things up. And that's fine, to do that, but just knowing what type of communication you have at each level. And then you have accepted and then enrolled. Now, the great thing about community college is that, and well, it's good and bad, is that all of this sort of happens very quickly. But what we need to start potentially thinking about when we talk about recruitment is how do we make this not be such a quick turnaround, but that students are at the prospect level and they're going through and they're applying, you know, maybe even 6 months to a year in advance because they've made the decision that they want to attend a community college. They want to attend your community college. What that means is that that communication has to be sustained throughout, because one of the things that you'll see is that the recruiting doesn't end until a student is, you know, several weeks into a class sometimes, because communications are still happening from other institutions. And this is the game. This is kind of, and I don't like to think of it as a business, but this is what happens when you talk about recruiting. So know your funnel, know the information that you want to be at each stage in this funnel, what messages, and what messages to each of those audience segments. All right, so the next slide. Oh, and of course, yes, it is all about the student. So I think sometimes institutions get caught up in talking a lot about themselves, but you need to reframe some of those messages to say, how does this fit into, like, what does the student want to know? And one way that you can really start thinking through that is to hold focus groups. You can ask your students who have been enrolled for a year, what is it that you felt like you needed to know at the beginning stages of a process of getting enrolled, so that you were informed, you knew what to do, and that you made your decision knowing all this information. So it is making all of this information and messaging about the student. All right, Paula.
Wonderful. Emily, that was great. Thank you so much. So guys, we are going to go into our second breakout session. We're probably just going to spend 5 minutes there. We're going to talk just a little bit in detail about communications. Do you have a communications plan? You know, how are you using this? Are you reaching all those different audiences? What about continuing students? Technology you're using to support this, marketing automation, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
And I think, are you ready?
We're ready.
I think I figured it out. So let's try this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh no. We had really great conversations going, so
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
sorry, you said 5 minutes.
Well, I know. I'm just
I apologize.
no. It was great. It's good.
No, it was really good. Thank you so much, Monty, for bringing us back. Stacia,
Yeah.
sorry we cut you off there, but I hope,
No worries.
Emily, I hope you guys had great conversations. I think we did too, even though it was a short amount of time. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. So, we've only got about 15 minutes left together in our conversation today, and we're going to probably have to skip over some things, which I think is just fine. So, let me just sort of kind of move on to the next piece of this, if that's all right with y'all. We talked about getting the house in order, stepping up our game. The final piece should surprise no one. I think that retention, like we cannot probably emphasize it enough. I thought Emily and I discussed using a clip from The Office to show you all the importance of not how much more effort and energy it takes to recruit a new student as it does to maintain a student and retain that student with us and help them get what Janelle, as you said, from app to cap, right? So it's really, really important for us to retain our students. And I think that what I'd like just to say here is that I think that more than ever, what this means that we, who have traditionally sort of been in a more student services kind of mindset, we need to step into the classroom and we need to get more faculty involved in what we're doing. If a few years ago, this really hit me. This was another Dallas Herring lecture when Dr. Karen Stout from Achieving the Dream spoke. She talked about the importance about if we really want to see change with our key metrics and our completion rates, if we really want to do that, we have to focus on what's happening with teaching and learning. And I think that what we've got to kind of focus on, I think Josh Weiner also said this, that a lot of times we talk about all the things we need to do differently, but the thing we never really end up talking about is what we might need to do differently in the classroom. And I think that it is our job as people who care very much, obviously, about this whole cycle, what's happening from the time they're interested in us all the way through that graduation and beyond. We've got to take more ownership of saying, like, how can we support what's happening inside the classroom? And I just feel like it's not necessarily the most comfortable conversation for all of us to have, and it's harder work. But if we don't do it, I think that we're still always going to be missing this piece of our work. Emily, is there anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, I think we'll probably kind of keep going.
Yeah, sure. I think the only thing would say, just to kind of tag on to what you were saying, is that, just as much as recruiting and enrollment management is the job of faculty too, right? It's everyone's job. Like, we're always recruiting, everyone's always recruiting. The same goes for retention. So it's this back and forth type of thing. So I think to remember that you are one entity, and that we are really great in community colleges at separating ourselves and being in silos, but to really start honing in on how do we operate as one. So I think that's important. But go ahead, Paula, you were doing great.
Yeah, no, awesome, wonderful. And guys, I'm just gonna, we're gonna skip a little bit over some of our breakout sessions. I think we took a little long earlier, but we're gonna kind of move into sort of the next phase of this conversation, which is us talking a little bit about making that strategic enrollment management plan. And I think that the thing I just want to sort of, again, set the stage here is that you've got to keep in mind that every school is different, and that not all of the approaches are not going to work for every school. You have to understand what your school is going through, your college needs, and are you guys ready? Sometimes there's things that need to be done first before you really feel like you can embark on some strategic enrollment management. So understanding where you are, I see Crystal still on my screen here, but like, when we were at Ron Cabarrus, we took 2 different cracks at trying to build a plan. And the first time we failed miserably. We really struggled finding our data and understanding it. And so it was, I felt a lot like a failure there for a minute, but then we came back at it when we were a little bit better prepared, and we were able to make it happen. So I think that, you just have to kind of understand where you guys are at and what you need. And also, Brian, you mentioned this in the chat, I think that sometimes you need outside help, outside validation, confirmation that doing something is really important. And sometimes an outside person is the person to help provide that. I also think that you don't always have the capacity internally to kind of see things, to step away from them. So sometimes having some outside support can be really impactful in doing this work. There's not one right way to kind of go through developing a strategic enrollment management plan. I think that sometimes people do a lot of small group work, and they kind of come back together. I think a lot of folks prefer to work in larger groups, more inclusive sort of college-wide groups. It really depends on you and your school and what is needed. I do think it's important to make sure that you've got an inclusive process, that you're involving stakeholders from around the college in some form or fashion. That could be surveys. It doesn't have to be like a giant working group. There's ways to do it, but make sure that the process you have created is inclusive. I feel like data is fundamental here. This is foundational. I think you've got to start there. Whatever process you're going to do, you first need to look at your stuff and say, how are our students performing? How many applications are we getting? What is our yield rate? What does our funnel look like that Emily showed us earlier? What does that look like for us? And then where are we losing students? What are our DFW rates? So understanding that kind of stuff. And honestly, we just looked at that first. We kind of pulled all the questions that we had with respect to data and looked at it. And I think you've got to be open at that stage in the process to letting the data guide you, to being open to being surprised. It's really important that you've got some support at the college leadership level, that people are willing to understand that there's an investment of time and energy that has to go into this kind of process, and that you're trying to not have this just be another thing that gets stuck up on a shelf alongside an ancient strategic plan, that you're trying to build something that is a real working process that you guys are going to be able to live by. I think it's important as you're going through this process to determine the scope of what you're trying to do. Is this a college-wide strategic enrollment management plan that you're developing? Or do you need to first tackle a smaller segment or audience because you need to really figure that out first? Thinking about how far out should our plan be? Are we really just talking like 1 or 2 years at this point, because the future is so murky? I don't know about you guys, but we always joke that we didn't have a crystal ball, but if we ever had one, it is certainly like very broken on the floor right now, So, think about how far out you are really willing to be able to take the scope of this kind of plan as you're kind of dreaming about what you want this to be. We talked about this a little bit in terms of building an inclusive process, but making sure that you're involving the right people depending upon what you're trying to do, making sure you've got the faculty involvement, the continuing education, the basic skills, all of that kind of important work. I think it's important to decide how you're going to report and monitor this, because if you take a look at all of your data at the get-go and you say, here's where we are, here's a census, here's our point in time, here's us right now, how are you going to monitor that? Are you going to come back to it in 6 months and look at the same data points? Are you going to come back to it in a year and look at the same data points? What are you going to do? And if you're not, you've got to be committed to, I think, doing that work as part of this. And I think that's both during that plan development, depending upon how long that's going to take you, as well as after the implementation. Finally, I'll just say, like, I do think you should set yourself a deadline. You know, in my experience, if you don't, it's just going to take forever and probably not work. People will get distracted. They will get lost. I personally feel like it's better to set an aggressive deadline or a project plan and try to get it done rather quickly so you can keep people's attention. It doesn't mean that it's then set in stone and it's the only thing you ever do, but I think that there's some value in getting it done. Otherwise, it just kind of could linger and take forever and not actually be impactful. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes here. We are going to keep kind of moving, and Emily and I are going to take a few moments just to share some other things that I think that hopefully will help you as you're thinking through these next steps. So one thing I have found that I think that it's important is that I really think it's important to keep in mind that as you're going through this process, that look for big things that might be potential barriers or roadblocks. Be open to seeing those. I've told probably this story before, but I distinctly remember, this is years ago, I was at my very first enrollment management conference, and all these people were in the room, and it was a little bit overwhelming. They were all talking about sort of like getting students, they were talking about summer melt and getting students registered before they left for classes, left in the spring term, getting them registered for fall. And I was like, wait a second, what about if you don't start registering students for fall until the end of June? And there was like this collective gasp in this room, like 80 people like swiveled their heads to look at me, and like, I was just like mortified because I was like, oh my God, like what I clearly don't get it. And this was a big thing for us. Like we realized that like our students were walking out the door in May and we hadn't gotten them enrolled for fall. So then we had to bring them back in fall, bring them back over the summer to get that taken care of. And it was like, no, we need to make sure that we capture them while they're here and we take care of them while they're here. Then they can forget about it over the summer if they're not taking summer classes and they've already got their schedule outlined. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, keep going.
Okay, great. And then I also think it's important to similarly look for some of those small things because they can be really impactful too. I remember for us, one of the things was really being able to see our financial aid screens in Colleague was super impactful. Being able to just know, oh, a student's been flagged for verification. They owe the household income verification form. Great, now I know this as like an advisor, as somebody who's seeing a student. I don't have to send them to financial aid to see this. I can just literally print the form out or email it to them and take care of that right here and now. So that was like a small thing, but it was pretty impactful. Okay, we've only got 2 minutes left. So Emily, what do you think if I just take us all the way down and we'll just see if there's any sort of wrap up questions, things like that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So we have, lots more things to kind of discuss with you guys, but we'll send our presentation and some of our notes. I think that just to leave you, like, keep learning and reading and listening, let's learn what we can from some of our four-year friends. I think that the Education Advisory Board talks about how, like, they're actually more alike than we are different. And a lot of times they're ahead of the curve on certain things. So learning from them, reading, checking out things like EdNC and reading Emily's work, of course, other sort of the great platforms out there that are kind of giving us more food for thought. There's been so many awesome podcasts now, I feel like over the last year, that are really worth touching on. And obviously webinars, hopefully like this, conferences when they come back. I think that those are really important things for us to kind of keep fresh on and just utilize. Thank you all so much for taking the time to spend with us this morning. I'm sorry we rushed through the last piece of this conversation, but it really has been a pleasure to get to see some of your faces and talk with you. And if you have any questions now, we'd be happy to take them, or if you just want to catch up with Emily and I at a different point in time, we're happy to talk to you too.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this running just for a little while, but in the interim, just in case there are questions and they want to ask you, I'll leave it running for probably about 5 minutes. But in the meantime, thank you, Paula Dibley and Emily Thomas, for this wonderful presentation. It was great. Thank you. Also, I want to thank the Strategic Enrollment Management Task Force for putting this together. We do have more training coming up in the next few months in case you want to know. One is going to be utilizing your data for enrollment management planning and decision making. Also, how does the image of an institution connect to enrollment management? Another one is effectively utilizing financial aid and foundation funding resources for enrollment strategies, and also understanding the reframing of community colleges, the role of community colleges in today's higher education. That is just a few, and we will have more to add to that later. So again, thank you for being on the call, and this was a wonderful presentation today. And I'll leave it up for about 5 minutes just in case someone wants to ask questions. And I'll leave it recording also. So
awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hickman.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, ladies. It was wonderful.
Yeah, no, it was our pleasure to get to talk with you guys.
And I've learned a lot about Teams today. So
just about Microsoft Teams. That's it.
I learned a lot. No, I learned a lot from you all, but Teams had me stumped. So I learned a lot about how to do breakout rooms today.
Awesome.
Emily, I'm sorry we took so long. I'm sort of bummed we didn't get to dive into some of those other breakouts and cover some of the other content.
Yeah,
well, I'll be honest. If you would like, you can revamp your presentation to just include some more information, and we can try to have this again, a part 2.
I think it would be really good, Paula, to really kind of put together sort of a plan in terms of like what step 1, kind of strategic plan, and so everyone can sort of have sort of a starting off kind of
like a how-to guide kind of deal.
Yeah, a how-to guide, and even like how to create sort of a communication audit internally, or what resources you need. So I don't know if that would be helpful for others, but I think it'd be helpful.
I think it's helpful because some of the things you said, people had a lot of great comments on, but I think what you said made a lot of sense, but people don't know how to do it. They know sometimes what maybe needs to be done, but not how.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's and because it feels overwhelming, right? When I started working as an enrollment strategist, when I stepped into it, it felt overwhelming. And so I can only imagine that if you're tasked with putting this together, that it just feels like too much. So I think it'd be cool, Paula, if we can have other people join too and create this how-to guide.
Absolutely.
We have a task force.
Yeah, right.
We already have a task force. And one thing we're doing with the task force is we're looking at we're going to transition into a consulting mode later, where we actually engage the campuses on their strategic plans and help them figure out where they may have holes, or help them facilitate some discussion on ideas. And so that's what we're going to.
That's great, because I think that's honestly, a lot of schools are, if until you've kind of gone through some of this, it's hard to be able to know what you're looking for and what you should be doing. So yeah. I do think that a lot of times that outside support, those outside eyes, can be impactful and validating. I think Laura is right. Talking about getting started is really like a big chunk of the battle. And I think that when it comes to the communications plan, I do think you've got to audit everything, but I also think that there's some value in sometimes starting small, like saying, y'all, let's look at summer right now. Let's look at building out. If we did it well and we were trying to communicate between now and the start of, the 10% point, just as for instance, of summer term, let's figure out how many times do we need to communicate with different people, and which groups would we be communicating with? Okay, we've got our potential students, we've got our applicants, we've got our the applied not enrolled group, and then we've got the folks who then did enroll, and then they've enrolled but they haven't paid. Like thinking about at what point in time do these different groups need to take action, and just building out even like 8 weeks worth of communication. Because I feel like if you can like build something small, a lot of that kind of work will then be able to be tweaked or replicated as you move forward, because each term there's similarities, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and Tracy, I don't know if you're still on, but you brought up a great point about partners, and I think it is absolutely crucial that you recognize who your partners are, that employers are natural college ambassadors. I mean, that's absolutely in your K-12. I mean, leveraging all of those partnerships to be able to do some of the heavy lifting for you in a lot of ways, that, not saying you don't have to communicate anymore, but those partners can really be a great asset to you. And so figuring out, are you leveraging those the best that you can? So I think that's a great point.
Absolutely. Really good point, Tracy.
Okay, our 5 minutes are up and there are no more questions. And so ladies, thank you. You have a wonderful day. And if you want to do a part 2 to this, just let me know and we can facilitate it, okay?
Cool. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I owe
Bye.
you lunch. It is.